Hello, it's April 18th. I'm Greg Farrar, and this is my daily COVID-19 trend live stream. For those of you watching live, which I see is more than usual, not quite a YouTube star yet, but gradually, very gradually getting there. Someday I'll plot the trend of my YouTube stardom on one of these graphs. But for those of you watching live, remember there is the chat. You can ask questions, asking me to focus on a particular country, state, or county of California, or a collection of them. I'm going to try to make this a short one today. Let's see if I can keep it to 30 minutes. So let's just go. United States, as always, far in the lead in total cases. Looking at it, and also still far in the lead in new cases. There's still this sense that it's reached a noisy plateau here, where for a couple weeks now it hasn't been seeing an increase of new cases, whereas some other countries like Spain and Italy and the like have plateaued, and have definitely plateaued and crossed that plateau and are declining. Still, the United States has been showing. I'll go to the. I'm just going to go straight to the rope chart. The United States has been showing a continued trend downward. It's still looking pretty good. It's below zero in growth according to the trend line, though there are a few days here that are a little above zero. The trends of the whole world overall, every time I click too hard on my mouse, my trackpad, it does this popping up the dictionary thing. Austria is the winner in the overall trend. Actually, let me zoom this out a little bit more, because there's this sort of, I see something here, you tell me if you see it too, which is that for a while, a couple weeks ago, we were seeing a general downward trend, and now though it's still downward, the trend is less steep. Right around April 3rd, there's sort of like an elbow in this I think I'm seeing in this rope chart, where all the countries were trending downward at a certain pace, a nice solid clip, and they're still trending downward, but not quite as fast. We have almost none of them that are trending upward. Only Ecuador still, which there at the bottom is trying to be not at the bottom by accelerating upward and having the most daily growth of any country, and that growth accelerating. Every other country is at worst flat. We've got Italy that's flat. We've got Switzerland that's flat. These are countries that were doing very well. So to see them flat, if I felt like they were done and they'd recovered, I'd say, well, that's bound to happen eventually, I guess. Or at least it's going to get very, very noisy eventually as you have fewer and fewer new cases. They're going to drop off this graph entirely, actually. But they're not by any means. They're still showing more new cases than anyone else, and yet flat. So Italy is a trouble spot as one of the top 5 still. It is seeing a downward growth every day, but that downward growth is only about 1 or 2%, and it's not getting better. It's not getting, the growth is not accelerating. So that's problematic for Italy. Switzerland similarly had this very nice recovery, and now not so much. I'm going to zoom in on Switzerland a little bit, just so you can see kind of what this looks like. We have a cluster here of points that are headed downward for quite a while until they reached what feels like in retrospect a kind of a bottom here. And then we've had a few clumps of high and one clump of low, and on the whole, these clumps of high, they're not terrible. I mean, 20% isn't great, but mostly these are 15, 5%, 10%, 3%, relatively small growth rates day over day, average of 3 days. But still, the general trend line is suggesting here that we may be flattening out before it really recovers. Switzerland at 5% is doing better than Italy it's roughly 3%, but still both flat. Other than that, though, the countries are looking good. Most of the countries are looking good. Japan, which has been pretty problematic about a week ago, is no longer heading upward, is now heading downward, and shows some good signs there, but too early to say for sure. It's certainly not running away with it, though. Yeah, there's a Peru, which is pretty low on our list, but Peru is sharply headed towards recovery right now, sharper than the rest, so that's nice. Other than that, the news for the countries is rather boring. They're all doing okay. They're all recovering, with those few exceptions. Brazil is another one that's flat. Brazil that we've had our eyes on because it doesn't seem to be doing as much as other countries to control the epidemic. For a while, it was looking like, well, Brazil, even though they're not doing much, they're doing all right, even though they're not politically or socially doing much. For a while, the trend line was sort of pretty good, like they maybe turned the corner. They also have leveled out. So we have several of these major countries which have leveled out in their growth rate. Brazil, unfortunately, leveled out above zero, so that means that it's got a steady 10% growth of new cases. And the past 4 days have been all above that. So Brazil is definitely a potential hotspot. Other than that, the top countries are looking good, and no one is really running away, except maybe Ecuador, and it's small enough in cases that it's hard to say. I didn't really look at much at the per million, but maybe worth noting that Ireland, far and away, has more new cases per million than anyone else, though Belgium is trying to keep up with that, and the United States also is a pretty substantial provider of new cases each day, but flat and hopefully dropping. The United States. Spain, which used to be up in this area, and well, I thought it was going to be Italy, but actually Switzerland and Italy, sure, all used to be in the top weeks ago in daily cases. Not anymore. They're seeing fewer and fewer cases every day, though as we saw in the previous graphs, Italy has something to worry about. These other two seem to be solidly recovering, but Italy, it could go badly for Italy, as we've seen in the most recent days. Growth of cases worldwide shows a real sense that it's flattening out. It's reached a plateau, though a noisy, sort of wavy plateau. But we're still not seeing, in fact, we're seeing just a few days ago, it looked like the world was hitting zero. Its trend line hit zero, and it looked like the world might be headed in a good direction. But it's had a few bad days. Really a few bad weeks, because all of these have been upwards, and that trend is no longer in evidence here. We see the world as a whole flattening, kind of like we're seeing with Italy, and it's flattening out right now at about a 15% daily growth. Given that so many of the big countries are doing well, you might ask, how can the world be doing poorly? The only answer I can give at this point, we'll watch and see if other countries, well, part of the answer is we have a lot of countries flattening out, and those ones no longer, if they all flatten out, the world will. The other answer could be that there are a lot of, where the big countries have gotten over it, there are a lot of up and coming hotspots. My graph doesn't show that. Maybe one of these days I'll do a top 100, or maybe even all countries, just for kicks, show this graph for all the countries and see how well that rope holds together once we pull the top 100 or the top 50 in. But the fact that the world is not looking good suggests there may be a lot of smaller hotspots that are starting to come online, and those will be popping into our top 25 if so, and displacing all these countries that look so nice. Overall, though, the rope chart certainly indicates a general trend downward. The other possibility is that it is the major countries, the large countries, that aren't doing as well. And if we look at it, we can see that of the top 5, there are 4 of them that are barely below zero. And then France is doing quite a bit better, but at an 8% daily shrinkage. But the ones that are seeing 10% or so, nobody's seeing 20%. We're not seeing any countries doing super well here, the best one being Austria. So with a few countries way up here, and with a lot of the heavily contributing countries barely at zero, that also could explain why we're not seeing the world showing turning the corner. Deaths by country, still led by the United States solidly. We see Italy and Spain have peaked apparently and are turning downward. Though again, if Italy goes south in cases, it will eventually go south in deaths, except to whatever degree treatments are able to control the number of deaths from a certain number of cases, which is something else we keep seeing. Per million, Belgium in deaths. Per million, we had Ireland, I think it was, that was really leading the world in deaths per million, or in cases per million. But Belgium is seeing a lot more deaths than anyone else right now. That's still unexplained in any story I've heard, any news story. But that's what the data show us. And then United Kingdom, Sweden, a few others, but mostly it's kind of a pack. A lot of countries are showing per million deaths in about the same range. The rope chart for the world, I think we have deaths worldwide. The rope chart of deaths by country is looking pretty good. We do have a general downtrend. Russia's looking bad in deaths. At least it's not accelerating. Japan is looking bad in deaths and is accelerating in its growth rate. So Japan, we saw Japan as a hot spot before, but it kind of went away, I think. And if we look at the rope chart for Japan, it's not doing so bad in cases. It certainly isn't accelerating off to infinity like it looked like it might a week ago. Japan seems to be getting its cases under control, so the deaths also will follow, we can imagine. But not quite. Here's a case where deaths are definitely lagging cases. Deaths still rising. It was a week ago when we saw a curve like this for Japan's cases, but now we're seeing it for deaths. Japan was a real standout about a week ago in cases and looked like it might become a hot spot, and we're seeing a delay here of a week, and now it's the one that's bucking the trend in deaths. It and hard to see. Looks like Switzerland. Deaths worldwide still looking to cross that zero line towards negative growth soon, which again is weird given that we have so many. We have not reached a peak, it seems, in worldwide cases. We are seeing a peak in deaths. Maybe it's some of the experimental success with experimental treatments. Let's move on to the states. As always, New York leading. As always, New York reporting one day late here, so New York will look slightly more optimistic than it should, but as recently, New York doesn't need that much optimism. It has plenty to go around right now. New York and New Jersey both leading, but New York has turned the corner and is heading downward visibly on this graph. Where's its most recent? Oh, that's right. Its most recent day is 0. So maybe it's flat because that 0 isn't real, but it's had a lot of days to confirm that it's not going upwards anymore. New Jersey might be going upwards anymore. Let's look at the rope chart. And before we do, New Jersey and New York still leading per million. Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Don't remember seeing Rhode Island before. Let's just take a quick look at Rhode Island. Okay, well, so this is news. Rhode Island has burst into the top the top cases, and in terms of cases per million, this is particularly impressive, I think, because Rhode Island, because this top 25 is based on total new cases, not cases per million. And Rhode Island is not our largest and most populous state. For it to make this graph really says something, that it must have quite a situation developing there. And we see that in the way that it's moved up into the leaders in terms of per capita cases. I think it's still going to be very small. Yeah, still pretty small in total new daily cases, but enough to make the top 25 in new cases. So Rhode Island, interesting. Going to the rope chart. The worst is Massachusetts with a 11% growth rate. That's not a terrible growth rate. Ohio and Arizona follow close behind. Rhode Island. So Rhode Island, again, is showing up here, but it is trending slightly downward, though there's a mini trend upward. So we'll definitely keep an eye on Rhode Island, having just shown up. in our stats as it has displaced someone, I'm not sure who. That's good news for some state that has dropped out of the top 25. And I don't see any others that look new to me. Best situation is in Louisiana. We expected Louisiana might be a real problem. Guess not. Washington was a real problem, but got over it, and so it's doing quite well still. It's so far ahead of the curve that its curve looks a little different from everyone else. It got it so much earlier. Michigan, Pennsylvania, both doing fine. Michigan also was expected to be a hot spot, but I'm not going to be quite so guess not about Michigan. But Louisiana is so far ahead that guess not. Michigan totally could still go bad if Detroit goes bad, or anywhere else in Michigan, but Detroit was the real concern. So Pennsylvania, Missouri doing well, Alabama doing well, New York, good to see you doing well. Where is New Jersey? Where is New Jersey? Oh, sad day, New Jersey. Let's zoom out a little bit. New Jersey has been around zero, but it certainly looked like it was going to follow New York into solidly negative territory. But it didn't, or it did actually for a while, and for a while it was even ahead of New York. It got there first. But something's going on in New Jersey. Something is rotten in the state of New Jersey. We have New Jersey turning the corner back very slightly. It's too soon to say much, but I mean, it has a 0.02% or 0.002% growth rate. It's not much. It's nothing to worry about on the face of it. With zero growth and zero growth to its growth rate, that seems like a not terrible thing, but it does mean it's not getting fewer and fewer cases, and there's no particular reason to believe it will. It was down at negative 2% growth, and now it's gradually crept back up. So New Jersey looks like it's slowing its recovery. Let's look at Michigan. Michigan doing pretty well. Again, none of these have huge growth rates, though Louisiana is pretty big. Massachusetts, not so good in Massachusetts. 11% growth rate and maybe slightly rising. Pennsylvania is doing all right. California kind of reminds you of New Jersey in that it crossed zero and then it's just had enough bad days that it's not quite holding that. It is very slightly negative. At a couple percent negative, headed downward, so it has both the things we want, but just barely. Illinois, looking okay, crossing zero, but had one bad point that maybe bodes something bad to come. Florida has been in the news. They're opening their beaches. They think that things are okay there, or at least good enough to cautiously open beaches for certain activities. But the latest day has 35% new cases, and they're barely 3% below zero, dropping again. They have what we want to see, negative growth rate and dropping. But I'm going to zoom in because we're not seeing very much at these levels at this zoom. So Florida looks better when you look at zoomed in, but still less than 5%. So Florida is being fairly aggressive in opening up, and maybe a little too aggressive. The data suggests that may be too soon. Georgia, as we keep talking about, someone else who would really, another state that would love to open up quickly, is and has been a little bit lax in its controls. That's not necessarily a bad idea, but we do want to watch what the effects are of that. And it's not currently having a recovery, 4% in flat. So Georgia, not obviously good, heading in a good direction. Texas, kind of similarly in many ways. Texas has something resembling a shelter-in-place order, though maybe the governor doesn't like to call it that. But it is also not looking great, 2% in flat. We see a lot of these states looking kind of the same in the top. Kind of reminds you of the countries, where some countries are flattening out. So this really nice recovery we saw just a week and a half ago, it's not that it's gone, but the rope has frayed, and there are a lot of states that are not doing as well as, I'll zoom a little bit farther out so we can see, back here. back here, everyone was trending in this glorious direction. And then again, we saw an elbow, and now everyone's trending in a less glorious direction. It's kind of like we're seeing a new wave right now. I really think that's actually what's happening. We're seeing a second wave of the virus. We had put a lid on it, and then we're seeing a second wave. And why that is anyone's guess. It's possible that it's because people aren't willing to shelter in place as much. Certainly it's not for testing reasons, because those keep getting better. But and maybe it's something completely different. Maybe it's even something around reporting. We do know that the number of reported cases has risen in some cases just because the reporting terms have changed, the conditions under which something is reported as a case. So maybe it's nothing at all in the real world of cases and people sick. It's just something about reporting. Or maybe it's even that once the hospital systems caught up, they were able to report more quickly, and now it seems like we have more cases and we really don't. So do we have more cases? I don't know. Is this trend line heading downward? Well, yes, the trend line is heading downward, but it's based on an underlying metric that is only as good as what's reported. And so we'll be watching that as well in days to come to see does the trend stay downward? Some of these ones that are running away, like Arizona and Ohio and Massachusetts, all of them looking quite bad right now with positive growth and accelerating. And some of them that are looking a little bad, like New Jersey, also slightly accelerating, but at least negative growth or almost negative growth. The rope as a whole seems to be downward trended. It seems like it's headed downward. So mostly good news for the United States and for the states of the United States in new cases. In terms of testing, we have a new record. We have a new milestone. 2 states have passed 3%, and it's not Louisiana. It's Rhode Island. Didn't see that one coming. New York and Louisiana have been neck and neck in how much they're testing. I'm definitely going to have to look up Rhode Island in the news. I'm sure that people from Rhode Island are going to say, what do you mean Rhode Island isn't in the news? But here's Rhode Island. Rhode Island is doing spectacular testing, and I'm guessing that's because they have a real problem and they know it. The states that have tested most aggressively have been the states that have a problem. And so Rhode Island is our current winner out of all states in percent tested. They've got 3.1% tested, followed closely by just over 3% by New York. But Rhode Island is actually the best state in the union in testing. And their trend line's a little lower because they've really been accelerating recently, and the trend line hasn't quite caught up. Massachusetts also doing very well in testing. New Jersey, well, it's doing well, but it's doing half as well as the rest. And so when you see New York recovering and New Jersey turning back towards non-recovery, where they were kind of 2 peas in a pod a little bit ago, you start to wonder, could it be something about how New York has tested 3% of its population and New Jersey tested only 1.8? On the other hand, a week ago, I would have said 1.8 was spectacular testing. I used to say that 0.4% was very good, was good enough to get over it. And I still imagine that 4 to 0.8% is enough testing to get over it. Worked for South Korea anyway. But we see all the states are testing above that level, at least the top 25. And Rhode Island obviously has been for a long time. We just didn't know it from my analysis because I'm only looking at the top 25. So go Rhode Island. They have a big problem, but also they're testing very thoroughly. It's also possible that the reason that Rhode Island started to show up with all these cases because they tested. There are a couple of new studies rolling around. We saw Iceland's study that said, well, about 1%, little less than 1% of the population has the virus when we test randomly. That's of the whole population, which is a nice low number. We'd love to see that less than 1% of the world has the virus right now. But then you see random street testing happening in some place. I think it was maybe in the United States. I think it was a particular town in the United States. They just randomly tested a bunch of people on the street, and something like, I want to say something like 30% of them had the virus, which this was a real hot spot, but still, that's a crazy number. And then I've seen elsewhere, they did a little bit of antibody testing around in one of the counties in the Bay Area using Stanford's antibody test, and they were seeing 2 to 4%. Looked like they had the virus. Nice thing about antibody tests is it tells you, at least in theory, it tells you whether you've had it, not just whether you have it now. And so it may be that Rhode Island has a very high percentage and has for a while, and they've been testing madly, and it's turning up all these cases. If that's the case, then we would expect to see them recover. I don't remember, what did Rhode Island look like on the rope chart? I don't think we actually looked at it on the rope chart, but here's Rhode Island on the rope chart. Oh yeah, maybe we did. This little wave looks familiar to me. Rhode Island is recovering as far as we can tell, and it's seeing a reduction in daily new cases. So Rhode Island is doing the testing it needs to recover, and hopefully that will bring it around. And so far, the growth suggests that yes, it is in fact recovering. All right, let's see. New test results per million. Yeah, look at that. In terms of total testing being done right now per million. Then this is daily testing. This is new test results each day. Rhode Island is testing twice as fast as anyone else. Twice as fast as New York, which I think is second here. Twice as fast as Louisiana and Massachusetts. Rhode Island, whatever they've done, I don't know what they've done, because testing is sort of hard to come by, but Rhode Island has somehow managed to double their testing capacity. And it's increasing. They had some, like, look at this, 4% of the population, or 0.4% of the population was tested in a single day. No, that's Washington, and I remember that. That was because Washington hadn't tested for a while. Here's a Rhode Island point, but here's another one. Also, 0.4% of the population tested in a single day. It doesn't take long testing. Well, we're more like 0.2% on average, but that means that every 5 days they're testing 1% of the population. That will get everyone tested fast. So they're on a few months track to test their entire population, and that would be terrific. So go Rhode Island. Nice to see you in the top 25, or kind of a bummer to see you in the top 25 actually of new cases. But maybe it's because they're testing so fast that they're turning up cases that exist at the same rate in other states, but it's just not known because the testing is so small. Our testing rate's so small. It makes you want to move to Rhode Island. Okay, that's the news on the counties. And if Rhode Island is just getting these results by testing madly and hopefully tracing contacts and quarantining all the rest that goes once you find someone has a case, then we're going to see them fall out of the top 25, I think. They're just not going to have very many new cases because they're going to find them all pretty quickly, and they're going to quarantine them, and no one is going to come into contact with them. There won't be any new ones resulting from those ones. So Rhode Island is doing, it looks like, I would say better than any other state right now in that sense. Looking at counties, Los Angeles, always the high one, always way above everyone in total cases. But that's not going to be forever, I don't think, because Los Angeles continues to trend downward. Well, for instance, Riverside trends upward in new cases. We'll see. I hope that Riverside never passes. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. If Riverside passes Los Angeles, it either means that Los Angeles did really, really well, which is great, or that Riverside did really, really poorly, which is terrible. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit to see what some of the other counties are looking like. We see very good trends in Santa Clara. Surprising to me. Good but surprising if Santa Clara is actually turning a corner, because just a few days ago Santa Clara was looking like one of the problems of the Bay Area. Let me zoom in on that and see if that really is true. All right, well, there's this thing where it hasn't reported and double reported and didn't report and double report, and that screws up the line. But at the first glance, it looks like Santa Clara's looking good, dropping and recovering. we'll see more on the rope chart, but if the rope chart should really show Santa Clara way down there. Okay, let's zoom back in on the counties. I was going to finish this in 30 minutes. That's 30 minutes, but I'm not done yet, so I'm going to keep going. Santa Clara. Other counties that show that Contra Costa. It's not really obvious to me that we have any other downward swings here. Contra Costa. San Francisco is showing a downward swing. Also good news, because just 2 or 3 days ago, Santa Clara and San Francisco were some of the problems of the Bay Area. So let's just move to the rope chart. Well, briefly stopping by per million, Riverside, Imperial has just moved into the top 25. And why has it moved into the top 25, Imperial County? It's because it has way more cases per million every day than everyone else. Imperial has got some sort of out of control thing going on here where it's getting 80 to 100 cases per million, and no one else is doing that. Well, there are a handful here, but their trend line, therefore, is way above everyone else. So Imperial, which has not been a serious problem so far, is now starting to accelerate and to move into that top 25. I think that's going to look pretty bad on the rope chart as well. Let's see, Stanislaus, I think, also moved into the top 25 recently because of an acceleration. Pleased to see, I believe that Imperial bumped Monterey out of the top 25. So Monterey County is doing so well, but it's not even in the top 25 in new daily cases. Doesn't tell us anything about its curve, but it does tell us about its total numbers, or its total daily numbers. So Monterey is doing well. Imperial, not so well. I bet, nope, I thought we were going to see Imperial as Imperial I thought might be the very top one. All right, well, we have a fraying rope chart here again for counties. If I squint and lean back, I'd say this is trending downward. California as a whole is probably doing okay, but certainly there are a lot of cases. You could probably squint and say, no, it's trending upward. But the zero line is here, right here at Alameda. Alameda is almost exactly on zero. And so there's a lot more below, at least a lot more room below than room above. Of the ones that are above, there are a couple, Tulare and Riverside, which are looking better. They're trending towards looking better. They've still got daily growth. They're still heading upward in new cases every day, but they're trending towards looking better. So this is that distant prediction that we get here with the rope chart, where we can say, all right, Tulare and Riverside counties aren't doing great, but they're trending downward. Actually, no one else really is up in this top group, though. So this is kind of bad news for a whole collection of counties. Ventura, the worst at 16% growth rate. At least the growth rates aren't enormous. And then we have Orange and all the orange-colored counties, including literally Orange County, Orange, Santa Barbara, and someone else. I can't grab it. Can't tell. I'm going to zoom in just so I can tell you, because it's one of the big hot spots. Orange, Santa Barbara, and Imperial. Okay, that's Imperial. We knew Imperial would be a problem here. Imperial County just having bumped into the top 25 because it's got this pretty bad growth curve. Here at the top, I think this is probably Imperial's line. Yeah, Imperial sweeping upwards rapidly with an almost 15% growth and rising rapidly. Imperial has a problem. They're still low in total cases per day, but they have a problem. And so does Orange. Orange is not that low in total cases each day, but they're heading upwards as well. Same with San Bernardino and Solano. You could say that, is this Solano? Which one is Solano? You could say that San Bernardino is stable, but it's stable at a 10% growth rate per day, which is not stable in a sense. So at least it's not getting worse like most of these up here, but it's still not great. Marin has a lower growth rate, but accelerating. Santa Clara has not such a bad growth rate, but still all of these are above zero. They're growing day over day. Tulare, Riverside, San Joaquin, I think I forget what we saw about San Joaquin, whether it was really bad or really good just a couple days ago. But San Joaquin is not looking too bad, whichever it was. It's just a few percent growth and stable at that. So San Joaquin not looking too bad. But the ones that are really looking good are all these down here. And again, we have this sense that we have two divergent groups. We have all the ones above zero that are accelerating, all the ones below zero that are decelerating, or they're getting even better. And there's no reason that should be. We often see things above zero that are dropping, or things below zero that are improving, but not so much today. All the counties below zero, with the single exception of San Luis Obispo, are all getting they're getting better. They're accelerating in their growth. And some of them are doing great. Placer at 23%, Contra Costa, Sonoma, all in the 20% range. And then Kern County at 15%. All of these looking great and dropping quickly. These are going to, they're not going to stay in the top 25 very long. Kern has a long way to drop out of the middle there, and Contra Costa, but they're all looking very good right now. And so is Los Angeles, which is one of the reasons the state still looks good. Los Angeles, again, dropping. It's got both of the characteristics we like to see, where we have a negative 10%, a negative growth rate, and a downward slope. So Los Angeles looking very good, 10% fewer cases each day, and that percentage is dropping. Stanislaus as well, looking fairly good. I will say that San Luis Obispo is a little bit troubled here, and I guess San Mateo isn't looking so great. Though its growth rate is negative, it has fewer cases every day, that's good. It is trending slowly back towards that zero line, so it could become a new growth spot, a new increasing growth spot if that continues. So very mixed bag here for the counties, very mixed. Some going up, some going down. Really no obvious trend here, but very good to see that Los Angeles, which was our really problematic county, is now recovering. Let's look at the Bay Area very briefly. We can't do Monterey anymore because Monterey is doing well. But unfortunately, since Monterey was doing well, that made our overall group here look better. I was throwing in San Joaquin, but with or without, San Joaquin is doing well. San Joaquin and Santa Cruz are doing exactly the same thing right now. They're growing. Santa Cruz has too few cases for this to mean much, but if we had to guess, growing slowly, very slowly, 2%, not dropping in its growth rate, not rising in its growth rate. Santa Cruz is, I would call it stable. Nothing much to worry about there, but it does need to turn downward in the end, but it has few cases. The only really problematic county right now is Santa Clara County, and I think that is actually the one that I was saying before. Santa Clara is not that problematic. It's only got a 5% growth rate. It has a slight upward trend though, so it needs to pull itself down as well. But the Bay Area is just it's looking kind of middling. We did see Monterey recover its way all the way out of the top 25, but it's got few enough cases that it might come back. Mostly there's no exciting news in the Bay Area, no dire warnings, no joyful exultations about pending recoveries. San Francisco, it's nice to see, is slightly below zero and trending downward. The other ones trending a little upwards or flat. So yeah, not much news in the Bay Area. We're going to have to just watch it and see what happens, because at least it's not running away, but it's not obviously quickly recovering either. That's the news all around. My name is Greg Farrar. I will be back every day because new things keep happening. There was a time when it looked like the recovery was well underway. There was nothing much to say except just let's ride this sled down out of here. But we seem to be hitting a few local minima on our way down the slope, and I don't know if our sled's clearly making it at this point. It seems like it should. Overall, the trends are good, but there's resistance, let's just say. We're riding our sled down the hill and we keep running through brush. So we'll keep an eye on it and hope things accelerate. Hope the testing comes online. Hope that there's not some terrible calamity happening caused by a bunch of states opening up too soon. Stay inside if your governor says to or your region says to. Stay inside anyway if you can. It's everyone here joining together that's actually making these things happen on the upside or the downside. So your part matters. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for listening.